All right, so let's get started, guys. We have all afternoon here. I honestly don't know how long this is going to take. We'll see how it goes. You've been going through the pain of having to not only install AWS Workspace, but also loading this forensic file. Typically, this doesn't take very long. I'm not going to get into the details of everything that's been going on here. We're trying to figure all this stuff as we go along. A lot of this type of software that you're going to see today, with the exception of a lot of the open source software, this is high performance enterprise level type software. So what you guys have been playing with is one of the latest tools that the FBI actually uses today. It's the latest version that you guys have available. And so we're doing this on real software, the real stuff. But what FBI and NSA uses to look at cases. The case that you guys loaded was a single file, right? And this was an image from just a desktop machine. Typically, case files are more than just one machine. There could be up to 10 machines in an organization, in a company where you suspect somebody's, messing around with weird links during work hours or things like that. It also includes mobile phones, Android, iPhone, all this type of stuff forms a case. So here we just have a case with a single file, but it's enough for the purposes of what we're going to do today. Okay. So just a little bit of background. I'm a professor over at Montana State University. I've been a professor at Montana State for approximately 13 years. Before that, I worked I was an assistant professor for about 7 years, an associate professor for about 5 years, and now I'm a full professor at MSU. Before that, I worked at HP and at Intel, designing microchips and doing something totally different than what we do now. And so this has been an interesting switch to cyber forensics. The reason I'm doing this, just so you guys know, the piece of the pie for grants from the National Science Foundation is about that big. The piece of the pie from the Department of Defense, DHS, NSA, is about this big. If you ever looked at the budget from the federal government or anything that has to do with defense, it's huge. Okay, and so when you want to play in that space, there's a lot more money available for you to play in it, and that's one of the reasons why I'm actually doing this as well. Okay, so some of the things that we're going to talk about today, and just so you know, this is something that I taught in collaboration with a colleague that actually works in a cyber digital forensics firm. His name is Will Jitteroy. He's the actual CEO of that company right now. He had an original company you may have heard of called Iceberg, and that company, Iceberg, is doing a lot of digital forensics. He lives in Park City now. He retired. He sold his company for $100 million with his partners, and he retired in Park City, but he was nice enough to help me develop content for this digital forensics part. We taught this in approximately 8 weeks. So you're going to get 8 weeks in 3.5, 4 hours. Okay. And so the idea behind this is not that you come out as an expert in digital forensics, but the idea is to give you a little bit of an exposure of what a digital forensics investigator goes through, just so that some of you are going to say, oh my God, that's not for me, I'm never going to do that. And some of you are going to say, wow, this is really cool, I really want to get into this. Okay, that's the purpose of what we're going to do today. You're going to get a glimpse as to some of these tools, some of the tools that you're going to play with now. You're not going to be an expert on the tools. There's a million different ways in which you can view data and configure some of these tools. So don't get bogged down into the details. Just absorb this and try to understand that this is a synthesis of kind of the field of digital forensics. So you guys come out with this and, hey, maybe I want to do some research in this. Maybe I want to be an operational specialist in this, whatever you guys want to do. Okay, so these are kind of some of the topics that we're going to try and cover today. Some of them a little bit deeper than others. I do not know how far we're going to get into all of this. Okay, so what is digital forensics, right? And I heard that somebody here was also somebody that's working in criminal work. I don't know what the background from everybody's here are most of you guys computer scientists? Do we have any different fields in here other than computer science? Really? That's amazing.
We have engineering, computer engineering.
Okay.
Anyone else? Computer science? Software engineering.
Software engineer, okay. Anybody like with a
We've
non-STEM?
got a chemical engineer that's over here.
We're doing chemistry.
Okay. Okay, yeah, all right. What field is that?
Chemistry.
Yeah, but what's your background? Chemical? Okay, all right. So anyway, cybersecurity is not about just computer science. It's like when I worked at HP, every time I visit my grandma, she'd say, "Can you fix my printer for me?" Right? It's not. It's like I don't know. Cybersecurity is kind of like that. It touches networks. It touches AI. It touches scripting, programming. It touches the humanities. It touches policy. Depends on what area of cybersecurity you want to get into. So cybersecurity, you're not going to talk to one person that knows everything about cybersecurity. Then there's the academic side, there's the engineering side, and then there's the operations side. People who sit in front of a monitor and monitor alerts all day. So there's different types of things that you can do in cybersecurity, right? And of course, it's been on the news every day now, especially with all the stuff that you guys have been seeing with Russia and Ukraine. Russia's been using the Ukraine as a staging ground for attacks for like many years, right? That's where they test a lot of their malware. Who can name the four biggest threats that we have in the US, foreign countries? So one, we just named Russia. China, Iran, Kim Jong-un, right? North Korea, that's the other one, right? North Korea focuses more on commercial attacks, and they try to attack companies like Sony, and you guys remember that. They're more focused on commercial attacks, right? Iran is more organized crime, and Russia is more organized in terms of military, right? So what's digital forensics? It's a collection, analysis, and interpretation of digital evidence. Okay, what on earth does that mean? There's a ton of different descriptions, definitions for digital evidence. I like the middle one a little bit better. It's succinct. It's information and data of investigative value that are stored or transmitted by a computer. Of course, a computer is a definition of anything that computes. It's your phone, right? Your phone is a pretty high, very powerful computer, right? Has anybody known how many K we went to the moon? Just to give you an idea. The original Apollo computer. Anybody know how many K we had on that? Here we had 32K. Okay, so we went to the moon on 32K, right? So if you guys are complaining that, oh, my computer's too slow, okay, go figure it out. You're the engineer, okay? So just to give you an idea of where we are. So some of the different types of digital data, I'm going to go through some of these definitions. I don't want to bog down too long on definitions. Death by power slide presentations is something that I hate. But unfortunately, because I'm trying to condense a lot of things in here, we're just going to have to go through some of these things. It's meant to be informal. Raise your hand, interrupt me whenever you want, and just ask me the question. And by the way, I go by my first name, Clem. I don't go by doctor, whatever. I'm still trying to hold on to a little bit of youth that I have left. So, okay. So types of digital data, right? Computer systems, laptops, desktops, servers, disk drives, RAM. We're going to talk a little bit about volatile versus non-volatile systems, right? So volatile meaning it disappears when you turn the power off, like the RAM on your computer, the memory, right? Disks, you're going to have the raw disks that you can capture if you are able to have physical access to the disk, but there's also digital access and just the software capture of the disk as well, okay? So we're going to talk about a couple of those. Communication systems, right? All the different types of networking, embedded computer systems, mobile devices, smart cars, anything that stores ones and zeros, okay, is digital evidence, potential digital evidence. Now, how do we process this, okay? One of the things that I just want to plant in your, as a little seed, a little voice in the back of your head is that whenever you're doing digital forensics, you're collecting, processing digital evidence, you need to follow a process. I'm going to give you an example of some of those processes, but you have to follow a process. There are a lot of books out there that describe different processes that are out there. A process is just a series of steps that you take to collect the evidence, to store the evidence, to keep track of who moved the evidence where. So if I give my drive with the evidence file to someone else, as we were doing this morning to try and install it on some of the computers, we need to know who had access to that drive at all times. So the reason we follow those processes is because if you go into a court of law and you say, here's the evidence and look what we found, the first thing the judge is going to say is, what is the process that you followed with the evidence? And if you don't have an answer to that, it's not going to be admissible in court. Okay, so you have to follow this process. So hacking away, it's good and fine if you want to do that, but it's not going to help you when you go in front of the judge if you're really trying to point the finger at something or something that occurred in your organization. Okay, so following your process is really important. All right, so context. Context is also critical when we're doing digital forensics. Okay, you want to. The first thing you want to do is understand why are you doing what you're doing. If you don't have a goal, if you don't have a hypothesis as to why you're reviewing a case, there's no point in really, unless you're learning and playing around with different things. Okay, but you have to have a why you're doing this. So the timelines can be very critical. Timelines, okay, with the context is going to directly influence what type of data you collect, how you process it. Okay, it's different corporate, right? Your boss, they're going to want to know what's going on, right? So they're going to have a context in which they want you to analyze the data. Legal departments are going to have a different idea. So they are the ones that are going to ask you about things like what is the process that you followed, okay? And law enforcement is also going to have a totally different perspective on how you collected this evidence. By the way, a lot of the stuff that you see in digital forensics comes from law enforcement, and so the legacy of digital forensics really comes from law enforcement. And what you find as you start reading some of the material, that a lot of this stuff has permeated into digital forensics. And so some people are still using some of the older models to process data, and some of those steps may be invalid in terms of digital forensics. It's a field that's changing constantly. Now you can store an entire disk in a virtual machine on the cloud. So how do you collect that disk from the cloud if that disk has been distributed amongst a whole bunch of different virtual machines, right? So there's a lot of things that you need to kind of think about as you're doing digital forensics, and that we need to be aware of. So since I had some slides that were really meant for an audience that wasn't computer savvy, okay, because I was expecting some of you were going to be non-STEM. I didn't know how many of you were going to be STEM. And so I hope that you understand what this means. If you don't, I think you're in the wrong field. And I'm just being blunt. I'm trying to save you some dollars. Let's look at some of the principles of some of these computer-based electronic evidence. Okay, when you're doing digital forensics, okay, no action should ever change the data. You're doing forensics. Okay, you should never change anything when you're looking at it. You're looking at it through a different lens. Okay, and you may have different lenses, but you should never change the data. If you're accessing original data, you have to be competent. This is kind of an assumption that is made in a lot of fields, even in software engineering for software engineers, right? It's the assumption of competency whenever you have a software engineer that's giving you an estimate on how long a task is going to be. I'm not going to ask my grandma, not a computer scientist, but I'm not going to ask her to tell me how long it's going to take, for this task to, how long is it going to take? So you have to assume that when you're accessing original data, that the people that are working for you are competent. And by competent, you know what the definition is. You have to have an audit trail or record of all the processes that you've applied. Depending on where you are and depending on the company, the gentleman that I worked with when we taught this course at MSU showed us the process that they use. And many companies use what's called the spreadsheet of doom. Okay, and the spreadsheet of doom is basically a spreadsheet that you create a whole bunch of tabs on it, and you can put maybe host IPs, maybe nodes, configuration, different types of systems. You can do whatever you want with that spreadsheet. Really, there isn't a specific method for doing this. But the point is that you're going to keep a record of everything that you see that you think it's interesting, because that becomes part of it's kind of like your lab notebook, right? So when you're doing a lab, right? Like remember when you were in like the 101 lab, whatever course you were doing, you had a lab note. Maybe those are obsolete now. I did it in the 90s. But that's what you did, right? You kept a record of everything, and that's what you need. So you need a spreadsheet of doom, whatever the form that comes for, whatever form that comes in for you. And then, of course, there has to be a person in charge of the case, okay? And they have the responsibility for ensuring that all the laws and principles are followed. Hopefully, you guys are loading those files. What's the percentage? Are you guys good? Okay, click on load the evidence. If it's done, there should be a yellow kind of bar at the bottom. Just click load the evidence on that. Okay, so that's good. Okay. By the way, when we're going through the lab, you're not going to know everything. When I went through this lab myself, it took me a while to figure a lot of these things. It took me like a few days sometimes. So I'm going to help you through when we get stuck. But I just wanted you guys to see, the process by which we, what we do. So digital evidence collection. Okay, we collect it typically through software and hardware tools. What you guys have with you is a zip, right, of an image of a computer. Okay, there are tools out there, and there are companies that allow you to collect that information from your computer, right? And some of them allow you to collect it from the cloud, and there are tools that allow you to collect that information from a mobile phone. A lot of those tools require that you register. Like, for example, with the FBI, you can't just go and download a tool that allows you to go and extract the information from someone's iPhone, right? Take an image of the iPhone. One of the biggest companies that produces some of this software, they're in Israel, and they produce amazing software that, I don't know if you guys remember the story of Mr. Khashoggi, the Washington Post reporter that was dismembered in the embassy. The Saudis dismembered him, which is the only one, because that's what they did. They chopped him up, right? And why did they do that? Because he was supposedly, spreading misinformation, right, about the Saudi government. The way they tracked him was through software that, they put a link on his phone that he fell for, and they tracked all the information and all the contacts that he had on that iPhone. Okay. If you guys want more on that, there's a story on BBC, and it's called "The Spy in Your Pocket," "The Spy in My Pocket." It's only a 20-minute BBC oral, which is a great story. It's fascinating, actually. So you guys can go and take a look at that. Okay. A few more definitions here. Volatile versus non-volatile artifacts, right? Volatile, they do not persist across power cycles. RAM, as an example. Non-volatile, right? They persist across power cycles. And the classic example would be a hard drive, right? All right. Hard drive captures. This is your hard disk. You want to create a copy of the contents of the hard drive to a file for analysis. This is what you guys have right now. Okay, there's actually more than just, there's a few little other things that get sprinkled in there. And you can do this, as I said before, physically or virtually. And we're going to talk a little bit about the principles here. Okay. Any questions on this so far? This is pretty generic, kind of, high level. It's going to get more into the weeds as we start looking at the tools. So, as I said before, I'm trying to synthesize a little bit of the field at a high level. So what is the concept of certainty? We're almost never certain, right? This is a protected term that must be used with extreme care. Okay, so if you come from, I come from the world of empirical software engineering, and so empirical software engineering, we use a lot of statistics. Statistics allow you to come up with hypotheses, right? Hypothesis is what? It's a statement of how you think the world works, right? And then if your hypothesis is correct, if you make a prediction and the prediction is true, then that means your hypothesis is correct. But it doesn't mean certainty. It means that I'm, with an alpha of whatever 0.05, sure, probably likely sure that what I'm seeing is not occurring by chance, right? And this is how, we do empirical analysis, right? That goes back in science if you've taken stats. So in cybersecurity, certainty is also something that we have to use with extreme care. There's always potential areas where you can look at something and say, yeah, but there's always an exception. Okay, so never say that you can prove something or that you with certainty can say something. There's a certain percentage of uncertainty that you're always going to have. Okay, and a lot of folks have come up with a model that allows you to present a case in terms of, they borrow this from science. And so this is what I call a little bit of pseudoscience. In other words, you present a hypothesis as to why you think you're seeing this link, in the evidence file that you have. And so you come up with a hypothesis. It's because this user has a history of doing this. And because if you look at their Facebook chats that are capturing the evidence files, you see a history of maybe communicating this with this person. So you come up with a whole bunch of little clues that hopefully help you come up with a hypothesis as to why something is occurring. And so cyber, some of the models have borrowed a little bit from that concept in science, right? The scientific model to try and come up with a way to explain that something is happening. And so that has worked quite well, but you don't necessarily go out and prove it with lots of statistics and doing a lot of this work. So it's certainly there. There's also a principle that I want you guys to be aware of, and this is for those of you who've done any type of criminal work or have worked with the FBI. You've probably heard of this. This is the cards exchange principle. This was a French guy sometime in the early 1900s who came up with this principle that basically says that whenever you have contact between two items, it's going to result in an exchange. And so basically what that means is that, right, if you have a criminal that enters a room and murders someone or whatever, there's evidence on the side of the criminal that they did something. They brought something to the crime site. And there's also evidence from the victim side, meaning something happened and there's evidence left on the victim side. And so there's this exchange that occurs that leaves a trail of evidence, okay? And so whenever you have a goal to go and do some digital forensics, when you have that why something has happened or what you think occurred, you start focusing more on these two individuals that were, accessing these weird websites, for example. And so now you have potential victims being a server or maybe being a different domain site. You have the potential people who were maybe, the perpetrators. And so you start creating this evidence exchange propositions in your mind, okay? But the cards exchange is it's something that you guys will hear about if you stay in digital forensics. There are different types of characteristics out there. As a computer scientist, class characteristics, think of that as an abstraction, right? A generalization, if you're thinking object-oriented, right? And individual characteristics are specificity, right? As you go down in the hierarchy of inheritance, you get more specific as you go down, right? That's all it is, okay? It's just they use class characteristics and individual characteristics for the definition in here. Forensic soundness, okay? We were just talking a little bit about this. How is the evidence handled? We're going to have to document all of this. We talked about non-modification of evidence. You cannot ever touch that. And the documentation, you have to have documentation, not just your spreadsheet of doom. Have you done things? What are all the tools? What is the timeline that you're investigating? What are the methods or the processes that you use? All of this hash values for anything that you're looking at, all of this forms part of the evidence trail, the file that you're going to take to court, okay? Okay, validation of data, okay, integrity of the data and the records being analyzed. You can never, if somebody's carrying some of the evidence from a thumb drive and they're driving from downtown to here to give me that thumb drive, there's a gap there, right? And I have to be aware of that gap, okay? And so you have to know what's going on at all times. You have to be able to show the contents of records that they're unchanged. Information in the record originates from some source. And then you look at information such as the date, collection record to make sure that that is all accurate. These are all different things that certainly if you go to court, they're certainly going to be able to ask you some of these questions. And in fact, those would be the first things that I would ask when somebody's bringing that evidence into a court, right? Where did you get this? Anybody touch it? What was the process you used? What was the timeline? Is it relevant to the case at hand? I don't want to see any evidence, right, shown to a jury that has nothing to do with the case. It's inadmissible, right? So things like that you need to be aware of. Chain of custody, documentation that proves the continuity of possession of evidence. What you see here, this is really more legacy, and this comes from more like criminal investigations. And so they use memos, right, to write everything by hand. You know, who had the evidence, what was the chain of custody, all sorts of things like that. And so this is legacy. Today we do a lot of these things, you know, digitally, but you know, the reason we put this here so you can see that there's actually a legacy that comes from the real criminal justice system as opposed to digital forensics is so new and it's changing every day. So, okay, the integrity. You want to show that the evidence has not been modified since the time of collection, hash functions to perform the work. And then hopefully you guys have used some of these, some of these algorithms before. Have you guys ever used those algorithms? Hopefully in some of your classes, maybe a little bit, right? What is a hash? Anybody know what a hash is? Okay.
It's like a way that you can, it's like a compressed way to compute the file integrity or like the integrity of any information.
Yeah, exactly, right? And so, you know,
repeat the answer.
yeah.
So it's like a compressed way of basically computing the integrity of information to basically show that it is what it says it is.
It's like a digital signature, right, for that file. So if I go and download a file from questionabledownloads.com and I put it into my computer, right, and I can calculate, before I open it, I'm going to calculate the hash, and maybe there's another site that says the hash for the file that you're downloading should be this. So if I compare the two and they're different, I'm probably not going to trust the questionable file downloads.com file that I just downloaded because the hash doesn't match. Okay. Now, there is a website called virustotal.com. You can go to this website called virustotal.com, and anytime you download a file from anywhere, you can calculate the hash. There's a command called get hash in your PowerShell in Windows, and it will give you, and you can specify the algorithm that you want, MD5, SHA1, whatever. And then you can put that calculated hash on the VirusTotal website, and it'll tell you if any of the major companies that look at malware have detected malware in that particular file. So it's a really useful thing whenever you guys are downloading a file and you're not sure. It takes 2 minutes to go to VirusTotal. You don't need a license to do these quick checkups, and you can play with that. Okay. Repeatability. Okay. So repeatability is something that comes from, it's also a term that's really borrowed from science. Okay. It's critical that for a given piece of evidence, the process by which it is analyzed is repeatable. This enables independent verification. If you're more from a science background, repeatability, you'll know that term as replicability. Okay. And when something is replicable, it means that you can do it again. Right? So whenever you write a paper, right, you have a section that's called methods, right, or methodology, which I hate that word because that's the study of methods. So don't use methodology, use method, or approach, right? So if you look at the approach, you should put enough information in the approach section of your paper that allows another reviewer or another scientist to be able to replicate the results that you just did, because that's the basis of science, right? In other words, you want other people to try that to see if they can prove or not prove, but if they can increase the power of your findings, or if they find something different. So in science, we traditionally call it replicability. In operational type environments, in more vocational sites, they use the term repeatability. Okay, and I got into a fight with that with an engineer, and I know. And that was my fault because I came from the academic side and he was coming from the operational side, and we're like, oh, you used it. Anyway, different story. So, Okay, evidence dynamics. Okay, the real world is imperfect. Any influence that changes, relocates, obscures, or obliterates evidence has to be documented. You have to be meticulous about this. So if you're the type of person that's not meticulous about things, digital forensics is not for you. Okay, regardless of intent. Okay, and the time frame from the time the evidence is transferred and the time the case is solved is critical. Okay. Digital forensics incident response, or you'll hear the term DFIR research quite a bit. Most of the state-of-the-art forensics research is done across academic, public, or private sectors. It kind of, spans the whole, broad spectrum. Everybody's getting involved in doing this. Be careful where you get information from. You have to do due diligence to make sure that the journal from where you're getting something is reputable, or you're not just getting something from a blog. I'm not saying blogs are bad. I'm just saying the onus is on you to make sure that what you're getting is the right type of information. And the premier DFIR venue is this digital forensics research workshop site, and they do conferences all over the world. They have different regions in the world by which they do conferences, and you can Google this and take a look at examples of the types of papers that they're doing and the type of work that they do. And incident response is this one over here. There are other cyber type journals and conferences, of course, many of them very reputable, and some of them are more geared towards practitioners, some are geared more towards academics. It's up to you to kind of scan that space. It's more difficult than others, actually. Okay. We already talked about volatile and non-volatile evidence. I think you guys know that. The non-volatile evidence, okay, this typically you have to figure out how you're going to access that data and how you power on the device, okay? Again, you have to prevent writing or modifying the data, and you have the investigation and scope and the logical data captures, okay? This is part of the interacting with a data storage device that doesn't modify data when it's powered off, okay? Non-volatile. So here's a couple of examples. Physical disk capture, the pros are that you can get a lot of the deleted files, right? When you have access to the full hardware disk. When you guys delete a file, in Linux, for example, right, you have an inode, and the inode is the one that points to the actual file. And when you delete a file, you're basically severing that inode, but the content is still there. And so when you have access to the actual hard disk, you can actually get all the information that even though you thought you deleted it, you can still get at the information, okay? So you're able to parse the entire raw file. Some of the cons, the capture used an unused disk, these captures used an unused disk space, so it's time consuming. It takes a little bit of time. There's dedicated tools that you need to have. You typically have a more dedicated environment where you are doing this type of digital forensics. There are some interesting shops out there that will recover your disk drive if, like, you drop your laptop or it's sunk somewhere. You don't know how, right? But they can recover a lot of your information. So there's tools out there that do this. You have really large output files, some of these things. Okay, logical disk captures. Some of the pros is that this gives us all the files from the operating system's point of view. This is much quicker. Okay. You get smaller output files, but you're not going to get a lot of the unused disk space, okay? And there's really no chance of recovering some of those deleted files, okay? There may be some tools out there that are coming out, but there's different ways in which they're storing this information that's kind of difficult to get, especially with the new SSD files, the SSD, I'm forgetting my acronym. Not the HDD files, not the ones that have your read-write heads, but then you, anybody know what SSD is? Solid state, thank you. Okay, I forgot. That's what happens when you get older. Okay, capturing volatile evidence. Volatile evidence is non-persistent. So you lose a lot of it when the device is turned off. So RAM, we already talked about. We already talked about that. Capturing volatile evidence. So this is typically done remotely over an SSH using a random capture tool. There's a tool out there called Volatility Search. This is one of the better tools that helps you capture memory. If you're ever playing around with stuff, you can take a look at that. I honestly don't see, what's interesting to me teaching some of this digital forensics is that I haven't seen really a ton of papers that are more academic. A lot of the papers that I see in digital forensics, it's really about how to use the tool, what is a better method for doing something, and those tend to be more operational, but not foundational research in the sense that you guys may be used to as coming from a university. So it's a little bit different. Anyway, so there's some information regarding volatile different evidence. Capturing network forensics data is going to require that you have some kind of tap in the wire, right? We're going to do a little bit of a lab. The second lab that we're doing today, it's going to go much faster and it doesn't take as long to load these files, okay? But we're going to go through the process, and depending on how much time we have, I'm just going to handhold you through the entire lab so you can see the process of doing some of the network forensics, right? So network forensics, right, allows you for a copy. You need to get all the, you need to get a file that has the PCAPs. I don't know if you know if this is a packet capture file that contains information across over what went across the wire. So then you can start looking at the information that's there. So this is network forensics, and the other one was disk forensics that we were talking about, right? There's another one that we also look at, registry forensics, Windows, and there's another one, memory forensics. That's really the volatile information that's out there. So there's different areas that you can go into, and there's different tools, of course. So we're talking about in network forensics, we're talking about a full packet capture, not just the metadata. Okay, not just what's in the protocol, okay, but we're talking about a full capture. Okay, we typically use a monitor port. Okay? We capture the file, as I said before, in a PCAP file. The line rate, capable of capture at same bandwidth as the source device. So you have to have a tab that's able to do that. Okay, depending on the speed at which that information is running through. It also requires that you have a lot of storage sometimes, because if you're doing a device that has like a 1 meg line, or depending on the speed of the line, and I'm going to show you a couple of stats, it can take, you're going to be storing like terabytes of information, not just gigabytes. Okay, and so you have to, have the capability to do a lot of this. Pros, you can capture everything for full capture of everything. You can include files, non-standard protocols, all sorts of things. The cons, right? You have to decrypt in line a lot of the information. If you don't have the right decryption, it's going to be difficult. You have to worry about man in the middle traffic. You have to worry about that. If you're taking a networks class, a man in the middle is somebody who's listening that shouldn't be listening, right? The newer TLS versions are making passive decryption a lot more difficult. So they're encrypting things, and they're doing things that are making it difficult for tools to get information. The new standard 1.3 is making things even more difficult. And so tools have to be evolving and keeping up with a lot of the different technologies that are coming out right now. And now, this is the more interesting one for me, is that it's harder and harder as people move to the cloud environments. Okay, how do you capture that information? And now that information is being piggybacked on lines that are carrying information from across multiple communications. And so it's getting difficult to decipher a lot of this information that's going across the wire. So here's some stats. On a 100 Mbps line, right, over 7 days, you have 7.56 terabytes of data that you're storing, right? And so, 10 gigabyte line, 30 days, you can do the math. So, it's it's not simple to do this. You want to capture smart information. Cloud, network metadata, okay. The cloud, AWS, VPC, flow logs, these are all the type of information that you have. On-premise, right, there's alert metadata, there's flow data. You're typically going to have a net flow collector. These are really not expensive. You can buy them in the order of $10, right, if you're doing these things. And you're also going to do some networks security monitoring of metadata. You're typically collecting information from a particular protocol. So you're looking at a port and you're collecting data from that particular port. So again, I'm giving you guys a very high level picture of a little bit of network forensics. So let me switch here to the next. How are we doing with time? 1:47. We'll take a break in about half an hour so you guys can, right? So we'll make this flow a little bit. I told you it's going to be difficult sitting through slides. Until we get working on the lab. So, all right. Okay, some more definitions. I'm going to try and move fast through this. This forensics is the study of analysis of storage volumes, right? Typically used when you cannot access the running state of the system. You're investigating historical activity. Most tools, as you're going to see with the forensics tool that you guys have installed, has a timeline of when you've done some things. And when you're working with law enforcement, we haven't talked about the types of disks, but I don't want to, this is not a class on operating systems, right? So your magnetic disks, these are your spinning disks, right? I still have an old computer in my office that makes a ton of noise every time I turn it on because I'm too lazy to buy a new one, right? Because everything's in there, all right? And it has a whole bunch of spinning disks, 30 meg, right? Read write. Whereas the solid state drives, right, they're at 500 meg read write. So, they're much, much faster. They're quiet, right? This is what typically you guys have in your laptops today, right? It was one of the first examples of malware. Was actually done by an experiment by IBM back in the 1970s. And one of the things that they did, this is when I was working at HP and we found out about this, they put a coffee cup on top of the big old drives, okay, the big old drives that had the actual read-write heads. And so a guy wrote a program that read and write bits of information to the big disk drive, but it read them in such a way that it read and wrote on opposite sides of the disk. And so basically what you did is you had the disk thrashing, or the heads thrashing like this, right? And if you do it fast enough, that thing starts vibrating like your mom's your washer, right? And eventually the coffee cup falls over, right? So there's an example of malware, right? Pretty cool. I think it's cool, but then again, I come from a different background. Okay, different types of disks. Okay, I don't want to get into this, but if you play with AWS, right? So nobody should be buying hardware these days, right? If you have a startup, you can go into AWS cloud and upgrade whenever you want something to a newer version, and you have access to those machines, and it's pretty good, right? Unless you have really sensitive information when you're worried about security, you can go to the cloud for pretty cheap. Right, so I run a company on the side, and we do everything on the cloud, and I never met anybody that I work with, right? So we've been doing this for 3 years. It's pretty cool. And so we never upgrade hardware, right? We just go to the console and we say upgrade from this to this. And it takes about 2 seconds, and now your machine is running on the latest stuff, right? So it's really an amazing time to start something. VMware volumes, I'm not going to get into those. There's different types of file systems that we're going to look at, right? You have one example in the lab that we're going to play with. There's NTFS, right? This file allocation table. FAT32 is a variation of FAT, right? And they have different security characteristics. You can easily Google differences between FAT and FAT32, and you're going to get a whole bunch of stuff, on Google. And the Apple file system, right? And this is also used in the iOS, iPad, watchOS. It's the same basically version of the operating system that's running on those machines. If you're savvy about operating systems and how they work, then it's a lot easier to figure out what are good ways to attack something, okay? If I know, that somebody's using Windows, one of the first things that I'm going to do, if it's somebody that doesn't know much about computer science, right, I'm going to put something in an auto-run directory that runs every day to do some damage or something like that, right? If they don't know how to do that, if they don't know their own operating system, then it's hard for them to do analysis of what's going on my computer. Why am I getting a message that says you have no email, right? So that's a joke that you can play with your friends. Don't do it. Okay, don't hear it from me. Okay, right? The reason that's a joke is because in the old days, we used to have computers that when you came in and logged in, the first thing that came out from Unix was, you have mail, right? I'm not kidding. That's the first little thing that popped up. You logged on and said, you have mail. You have one message. You have two new messages. And you're like, oh my God, somebody likes it. Someone sending two messages, right? Now we're trying to get rid of it like the plague, right? But, those were the days when email was actually interesting anymore. All right. So what's a file? Again, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but a file is just it's a series of bytes, right, that contain the information that you care about. It can be many different formats. It's indexed by a file system. In Linux, you can have an inode, right, and you can have different block sizes, and all these block sizes are linked together, like when you data structures class, right, like a linked list, and you can go through all the different blocks, right, and capture the entire information on your file. It's a combination of an indexed entry. Some of you may hear it as a master file table or metadata, depending on the file system that you're using. That just contains the index of where your files are, depending on the operating system that you're using. And this is something that in the magnet forensics software that you guys have installed on your machine, there's one little area that says operating system, and there's a lot of interesting information on the operating system that gets captured every time we do a digital capture of an actual machine. And so you can go in there and look at some of the different things that you're going to see from an operating system perspective. I already talked about file deletion. Okay, I don't want to take too much time on that. I don't want to talk about, we already talked about this, logical and physical disk captures. This is the evidence files that you loaded. Okay, this is one type of format that we use for capturing evidence information. There's also raw, but this is just a .eo1 file. That's what you guys have for your Axiom case right now, right? MBR is just a master boot record stored in the first sector of the hard disk. It contains a partition table. This is just basic operating systems course. The GPT, this is the global unique identifier for a partition table, okay, used in most modern non-Windows operating systems. Again, more definitions. As we play with this, you're going to need to know some of these definitions, partition tables. Okay, so let's do a little bit of some of the options that we have for doing analysis. The first thing is you want to make sure that you understand what it is that you're doing in the disk image before you get into it. And so that was the point in when I sent you guys that write-up of what the lab is. I think I put a little paragraph at the very top that said, it looks like your company is malware. So is that me or is somebody else talking? What's that? That sounds like me. That sounds like a joke. Anyway, you already have kind of a task, right? In the lab, what I said is somebody looks like they may have been attacked by log4j. And so when you're doing this lab, a seasoned person, somebody who understands a little bit about log4j, they're going to know, oh, what is the software that's susceptible to log4j? And so they already have a little bit of an advantage. If you've never done digital forensics, it's normal. You're not going to know where to start. And that's perfectly normal. And so, but when you do and you start getting better and better at this, you're going to say, oh, I know where to start looking and what are the key areas where I should be looking. And you would develop a set of cheat sheets depending on the malware that you're trying to analyze for, right? Your company got hired to do an analysis of this case file that is susceptible to log4j. And we're like, yep, we can do that. We've done that before a number of times with different companies. And a checklist of things that you're going to go through. Okay. And we're going to go through that in just a few seconds here. So what is it good for? The file that you have is going to have historical data. It's going to have lots of timelines. We're going to look at a lot of files that are there. You can right click on them and you can go to the log. And a lot of systems log a lot of information without you even knowing it. And so we're going to look for certain things in the log files that are going to give us hints as to what happened, right? There are certain domains that are known for being the originators of malware. So we're going to look for those domains in the log files. Did somebody try to access our system from that particular domain? Did they try to access a particular port, right? Those are the things that we're going to look for. And so those timelines help us paint a picture of, hey, this employee was here from December 21st to January 31st. We're going to bookend our investigation for those 2 dates. Anything outside of those 2 days says, well, maybe this person, it's not relevant to what we're trying to do. That helps you delete a lot of information. Timelining, the tools that you're going to use, for example, Magnet has the ability to do that, and some of the other tools that we're going to see in the network lab have also the ability to give you some of that timeline. Brim is one of the tools that we're going to look at later, and it also has that timeline capability. Okay. There's also key file system locations. This is critical. The more you know about digital forensics and the more you start doing this, you're going to know certain areas in the machine where there's cookie crumbs and pointers as to what happened or who's doing what. So the critical places are temporary files. So when I was doing my undergrad, I worked for a company that was an accounting firm. They didn't have one CPA in the company, go figure. But anyway, they had an entire system set up, a Linux system, and the way their mail system was set up was such that anytime anybody sent an email to anybody else, there was a temporary file that lived in some var directory, and that var directory, that email lived for about 2 seconds. So here's what I did. I wrote a script that copied those files whenever a new file was there just to see what was going on. Guess what? I had access to the entire corporate emails that went off between every employee. Right? I stopped that because I thought, that's not a good thing to do, right? But knowing about those things, right, and nobody else does, those are the type of things that make you a better investigator, right? And so knowing about those things, so what do? You have to find ways to fix those things, or you put your white hat on and try to do the right thing, right? There's also browsers. There's temporary places where browsers store things. Downloads cache. You can look at a downloads cache directory and find out what's being downloaded on this computer, who is looking at what. If you don't know how to clean your history on your browser, be careful, right? If somebody collected your computer for evidence, right? Email attachments. There's prefetch directories where it's like a cache where somebody prefetches something to improve performance. There's the Windows registry, there are jump lists, and there's common log directories. So we're going to cover each of those very quickly, right? There are some variable shortcuts. Everybody knows what environment variables are, right? And how you have to set up some of the environment variables. Look at some of the environment variables that you have on your computer and how they're set up and see what's there, right? See what's being stored anywhere. If you know about your own temporary places for some of your applications, and whenever you download something, or every now and then, just for sanitation purposes, if you have nothing to do on a Sunday, go and look at the temp file where your applications are storing information. If you find something interesting, okay, you may be surprised what they're collecting about you, right? There's also temporary files. We're not going to go through all the temporary files, but I'm putting them here just so that you guys can take a look at. There's lots of temporary files in the Windows operating system, and you can find those, for web cache, for Firefox, every one of the different browsers, whatever your main browser is that you use. Google, where does my browser store temporary files? And start monitoring those on your own just to see what's there. It might be interesting stuff that you find. So there's lots of stuff that are stored in temporary files. There's cache. This is where the different browsers store information, where they cache information because they know your habits. So it's easier to retrieve that information a little bit quicker next time you go to that site. Email attachments, where are they stored, right? Go and take a look at where those email attachments are stored. If you get an attachment and you're not sure, or if you're not sure if you have a virus on your computer, go to the attachment downloads, write a little script and run each of the different downloads through a hash function and run it through VirusTotal to see if you find a virus on your computer. Little things like that you can do on your own You could actually do that automatically and put it in a cron job and then just run it, all the time. And then just, your computer, stays a little bit healthier. There are prefetch places where you increase performance. Again, I'm not going to go through all of this because you guys will probably hit me. There's different cache places where we're gonna look at one of this in the next lab, where some of these applications, again, applications that are installed on a Windows machine, for example, store stuff. And so if you know where to look on the cache, you're going to find the full path information of the software, the last modification time, and the hash of that actual executable. So this is already giving you the hash, and then you can go to VirusTotal and find out, hey, what was in my cache, and did I have a virus? There's the registry. The registry, you guys, hopefully you know what the registry is on your Windows machine, right? It's in a sense its own operating system. It stores information. For example, the DLL, right? Your DLLs, whenever you download a DLL for your Windows machine, it gets the directory. There's an entry in the registry that says, here's where that DLL is actually stored, right? Why do we use DLLs in Windows? Just curious. Why do we have DLLs in Windows?
Prevent statically linking.
To prevent statically linking stuff, right? Yeah, at runtime, you can dynamically load that library. And so if you're running the latest game and the latest gaming company has a new version of a match faster, kill the orc, right, function, they're going to put it in a new DLL. You put it on the new DLL. You don't have to restart your system, right? Dynamically loads the new function that you're using, right? It would be a pain to have to recompile everything every time there's a new version of something, right? So you have DLLs, shared libraries in Linux, right? Okay, jump lists. This is related to recent items on the taskbar. Okay, there's a certain area where that data is stored. Also good to know. Of course, the register. Oh, I went backwards. Log on activity. If you know where your event logs are stored in Windows, there's a whole bunch of things to look for, and they have different IDs. And so if you know just a few of those IDs, you can find out who's trying to log on to that machine and how many times did that fail. If you have 10 failures in a row from the same IP address, something's going on, right? So that gives you a clue as to some of those things, right? So here's another place where you can look for activity of something going on, okay? All right, common log directories. Here's some of the common ones for Apache Tomcat, WebLogic, Exchange, vSphere, right? This is VMware's server, right? And you're going to see today that for VMware, it's actually also known as vCenter Server. Guess what? vCenter Server or vSphere was one of the major targets for Log4j virus. Okay, and so we're going to look at one of those things in the lab as you guys are looking at this. Okay. All right. So how is the download going? Is anybody still not fully downloaded?
Download.
It's processing. Is it what? 40% still? Some of you?
44%.
Ah, you go past the 40%. All right. Anybody still hanging on the loading? Wow. Okay. So everybody has their file and ready to go. Okay. So this is really good. It's 2 o'clock. Let's take 10 minutes. Take a bio break, 10 minutes, and then we'll come back here. Is that okay, Bernie?
Yeah.
Just yeah. I don't want to make. I want to make sure you guys don't fall asleep. So okay.
Clem, can I quickly comment? I am following online.
Yeah.
And you are doing an awesome job. Your sound comes very clear, and you said you don't like slides, but you did a great job going through definitions and the breadth of things that could be caught up. So I wanted to let you know that. And also, when you move around, the audio is still clear, but towards the center where the microphone is the best place. So that will be a good thing to remember. And then other than myself and Todd, the room itself, there are 8 other participants. And so if you have questions, maybe you should remember them if they have any questions and things like that. For example, for the background question, I know there was somebody who's doing management and information sciences, which is closed. We can call them computer science, but at least be aware of those people who are attending online. Otherwise, awesome job and very clear. Thank you.
Thanks, Asafo.
There is a hand already up now, Arjun.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I can't see that because I'm sharing my screen and I can't see the hands up.
Oh, thanks for letting me know because I usually put the hands up because I didn't want to like interrupt while you're talking.
Yeah, that's fine. If anybody, because I cannot see the hands up, and I thank you for letting me know that. Just interrupt me, and that's okay. Just say Clem. Just yell out my name, and I'll stop and I'll answer your question. I'm not going to be offended by you yelling my name. So